This is CounselCast, and I'm your host, Karin Conroy, your marketing co-counsel. In every episode, I discuss marketing topics with experts who answer your questions and help your law firm achieve next-level results. Here's today's guest.
I'm Jessica Lackey, business and operations strategist, helping expertise-based business owners implement the foundations for growth and scale.
Jessica, thank you for being here. I love conversations about operational systems, getting things done. I will make checklists and put things on my checklist just to check them off because this is the way my brain works. And it's like there's a little dopamine rush with the, yes, I did that. Um, and I want to talk a little bit about some things that I did within my firm to kind of put some systems in place later. But first, let's start where we need to start. The title of today's show is What's the Missing Piece in Your Law Firm's Growth Plan? But I feel like that also doesn't totally cover, well, it for sure doesn't cover everything we're going to talk about. But we're going to talk about growth plans and systems and running your business and all of that good stuff. So thank you for being here. Let's dig into it.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Let's start first with what is a growth plan?
So I see growth in three different stages. So there's starting and building. So this is the stage of your growth in your firm where you're figuring out who it is you want to serve and how you want to serve, and you're getting that marketing machine up and running a little bit. You know, you're kind of like, this is when you may be like a freelancer or solo lawyer, which is like, I'm just going to do whatever for anyone to get my foot in the door.
Yep.
That's that stage.
Make some money.
Make some money,
Yeah.
pay some bills.
Yes.
This is when you're trying lots of things. The
Yeah.
growth stage is the stage where you started to figure out, okay, this is what I like to do. These are the clients I like to work with. This is the marketing strategies that tend to work for me. So you're starting to get some predictability around the front end of the business. So
Yes.
the systems of what do you stand for? Who do you talk to? Who do you work with? How do you make money?
Yep.
And how do you bring in new clients?
Okay. This is so interesting because there's a lot of parallels between my agency and most law firms that we work with because, you know, we're obviously both firms. I work with lawyers. They're my client that I'm speaking to. So there's a lot of parallels. And so when I first started, way back in the early land of the internet, I started out by writing for this blog, and it was like this classic blog at the time called Lawyerist, and it was this audience of lawyers building, you know, their small businesses. But I was the only person talking about marketing. So I was writing blog posts, and then I had this ad, and my ad was positioned around cost and just getting people in the door. So it was like websites for $975. So this goes to show you how long ago this was, because they are not $975 anymore.
No.
Nor should they ever be. Just for the record, you could probably find someone who will give you that. Anyway, I digress. So then at one point, probably 7 or 8 years ago, I made a very strategic and specific turn, and it was very intentional. And I had a strategy coach, and we removed all pricing. We changed all the language, changed everything. And it wasn't that, and I talk about this story a lot because it's not that that was wrong. In the beginning, that was the right thing for that moment. But then it very quickly became wrong. And there was a lot of red flags. So let's talk a little bit about that transition because it can be painful. And I feel like people approach that transition between those two phases that you were describing, and they get freaked out by it. And it feels like a lot of work. And it also feels like they might be being told that they were wrong, which it's not wrong. So let's talk about like what that feels like, and then how you kind of go through going from that one phase to the other.
Yeah. And I will say that there's a third stage, which we'll talk about the next one, which is the scale stage, which is where
Oh, yes.
you got the front end kind of figured out, which
Yes.
then informs the back end you need to build in your business, which you've probably been building some, like you can't operate a law practice without having some general like invoicing and things like that.
Yeah.
But over structuring it to like making it so efficient actually hinders you from adapting your back end once you figure out exactly who you want to sell. So like I'm
Yeah.
like, don't try to like put the infrastructure for scale in too early, but that's
Yeah.
a we'll talk more about that. But that growth phase, what I think is really interesting here is when you start to say I'm not for everybody,
Yes.
and everyone's like, well, if I don't serve everybody, am I going to leave stuff on the table? I'm like, yes, you will. You
Yeah.
will leave things on the table. You will leave certain billing structures on the table. You will not do certain things
Yeah.
because by getting really solid at what you do, either, maybe it's a vertical of like a very specific, particular kind of thing, or maybe it's horizontal. You do something for a very particular industry or a very, like I work with a lot of CPAs too, and there's like CPAs for like the cannabis industry because it's very
Yes.
different. Like you got to like know your area really well,
Yeah.
and that evolves over time, but
Hmm.
that allows you to charge a pricing premium and know, well, this is, do I get my clients from billboards for personal injury lawyers and bus signs, or am I getting them from these super industry niche conferences? And
Yes, and
yeah,
referrals and a handful of specific named people that I can count on, or maybe one source. So just to go back to my own example, a huge number initially for that first bunch of years, I would say well over 80% of my business was coming in from that lawyerist. So I could point at, all of that and say, this is, and then as I started to change it, it did diversify. And so you do see that. And it's so scary, and I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had where they say, why wouldn't we just add 75 practice areas onto our website? Like they literally can't fathom why you wouldn't do that. And it seems limiting, and it seems sort of backwards, I guess. I don't know. I have a hard time getting into the heads of this argument. But how do you address that argument where, why wouldn't I go? It feels like you're not going big and you're not going after all the business.
it's a counterintuitive mind shift from I'm not going big, I'm going deep, and value comes from expertise, knowledge, real depth. That's my philosophy. Now, if you
Yeah.
are going to that, and this is also geared to, I think, small practices.
Yeah.
If you want to be a giant firm someday, you probably have to have a lot of practice areas
Yeah.
because they want the one-stop shop.
Right.
But if that's not what you want, you're like, I want to have a small practice. Maybe I want to be the you know, only, chief lawyer. If I want to have like a small micro agency, as it were,
Mhm.
I have to specialize because otherwise I can't charge a value premium.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I will say, even if you want a larger, in my definition, larger. So I'm not talking like multinational law firms with thousands of attorneys. I'm saying, not 5, but maybe, 100 attorneys. That in my is what I'm defining as sort of larger. If you want that kind of a firm, though, in my experience, I've seen it scale greater when there is a very, very clearly defined practice area. And so maybe within that practice area, maybe it is just personal injury. To me, that's still very broad, and so maybe that within that personal injury, there's a whole bunch of subsections. But we work with a firm that does just construction law. And that
Yeah.
seems somewhat narrow, but they do construction law across a bunch of states. And so where they've expanded is not in the practice area. They've expanded in their locations, the number of attorneys they have, and that way of building their business, instead of expanding into estate planning or some other random thing that
Yeah.
doesn't relate to that expertise.
Yeah, it changes your message. Like this allows you to get super focused on, again, your value, your authority, to get that expertise so that you don't have to be on the content hamster wheel of marketing.
Yes.
It allows you to simplify how you do the back end operations and who you bring on, because now you don't have to have generic paralegals and admin staff that are supporting. Some people do billing hourly and some people
Yeah.
do this. And you can structure your business back end so that allows for more scale. So you're actually charging more and being more efficient with,
Yes.
at some point, potentially fewer clients out of the gates.
Yeah.
But um, that's okay if you can build that over time and actually charge the ones that you keep more money.
Right. and provide them more value so that they want to be there and they want to stay there with you. Okay, so the next section, I want to talk about either like the building your business and the systems part, or that third level that you were kind of alluding to. Which do you think makes the most sense in terms of what we've kind of already been talking about? Should we go to that the third level of scale, or talk more about digging into the systems of all of it?
Well, the systems are what allow you to scale. So once
Oh, okay.
you've, yeah, which is
Yeah.
great. So it's like both things at once.
Yes.
So once you've, again, this is what I have seen in my business is that um, if you're really focused and you're lucky, you figure out somewhere around, and this may be like, minds blown for people, and you may say this is not relevant for lawyers, but I think it takes you like 3 or 4 years to figure out, that's on the early side, figuring out
Yes.
who it is you want to serve
Yep.
and how you like to serve, and really build that, the referral engine, or become that go-to on the conference circuit, or go-to in the trade publications. Like you come known for something, and then
Yeah.
that happens typically, what I've seen, around the 3 to 4 year mark.
Yep.
um, and then you say, okay, now I start to have intellectual property. I start
Yeah.
to have ways, I have processes, I have systems, I have standard steps because I'm doing similar type projects for similar type clients.
Yep.
I can think about changing my billing structures to reflect that I'm getting better. I'm becoming more efficient and actually probably becoming more effective.
Yeah.
And these are all where you start to say, okay, now I can start putting in some more back-end structures to the business, developing the team, standardizing the systems and the tools, codifying how we work in order to make that jump.
Okay, so I want to talk about how I did this in the last, I'd say 18 months or so, because it's been so fascinating, even as someone who feels like I'm a super overly organized person. But I also wanted to talk. Let's before I get into that, why why does it matter? Like, if I'm a great lawyer, and like I'm saying this with a very tongue in cheek, because I totally get why this matters. But like, if I'm a great lawyer, um, can I make the argument for, like, I just need to win the case? And, why do I need all of this extra stuff?
You can, but then it all relies on you,
Yeah.
and you are indistinguishable from your firm. It means that you can't scale. You can't have anyone else really support you, except maybe in like the back end side of the house, because it's you. It's not what your firm stands for. It's not your approach. It's not your practice area. It's you. And then it all relies on you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I noticed also, like, you talk a lot on your website about like this feeling of chaos and being scrambled, and that you're not making progress, and that you're also very stagnant. So I wanted to kind of come back to those pain points, because I feel like anybody running a business, especially in those first few years, but even as time goes on and you're building and things change, and like I feel like a lot has changed since COVID in the way that we all work together and whatever, but also just in the legal industry. And so maybe your firm is growing or not. So maybe things are super stagnant and you have no system around getting out there and bringing in more traffic and leads. And so then you're just sitting there like staring at the wall thinking, now what? you
Yeah.
know? Um, so I love that. I loved kind of the pain points that you lead with in terms of like, this is chaotic.
Yeah.
And yeah, you could do however it is that you are organizing or not organizing things, or maybe it's just one giant inbox with no folders, which like makes me want to itch. Like that's just right. Um, so real quick, I'm going to kind of summarize the story of how I did things. I tried a million different platforms to organize projects, and I go way back in terms of like Basecamp, original Basecamp, when that was the only thing, and that was what everyone did. And then that became real outdated pretty quick. So then I tried a lot of different things, and I could feel it right away when it wasn't working, because my clients would, it wasn't something I had to experience. They would be like, I have no idea what's going on. I cannot find it, and I'm irritated. And so I started hearing rumblings about ClickUp, and I decided, okay, I'm going to try this out, and this has got to work because I've tried all these other things. Anyway, long story short, ClickUp is amazing, but it is very, very involved. It does a bajillion things. And I knew I wasn't using it to its, optimum. So I hired this amazing consultant who spent 6 months just researching everything I do, from sales to projects to follow up to our internal processes for marketing and promotion and every single part, and put together this amazing system that has saved me on average probably 10 hours a week easily, if not more, and made things so perfect. And here's the lesson that I wanted to try to get to, and that was a longer story than I meant for it to be. But initially, when we launched, as someone who loves these kinds of systems and was so thrilled with it, she has this ongoing maintenance plan. And I was like, I think I'm good. This is amazing, whatever. Within about 2 weeks, I realized, no, this is like kind of a living document, and things don't just, it's not static. So even though it was so buttoned up and airtight, first of all, ClickUp itself changes. And so it has new features and it has different things. And second of all, we'll get in a project and we need a little variation on this. So the point I'm trying to make is that you need support in your systems because they will change. And you mentioned this earlier, that don't make it so airtight in the beginning without room for flexibility for figuring things out. So I just wanted to kind of talk real roughly in terms of how do you get started in creating these sort of systems, and how do you picture what needs to be in there and how you organize it, and how to just get started.
Yeah. The way to get started with systems is to actually first think about what is the goal of all the activities I'm doing. So simply writing down all the things that you're doing. I call this the prune step,
Yeah.
because you might find out by writing it down, by writing down where your clients come from. I always say, like, write down your clients, have some kind of list of your prospects and your, projects that are in proposal, your active accounts that you're managing from, ongoing work perspective, uh, something for your marketing activities, and like your business backend things that you have to do, your bookkeeping, your invoicing, all that kind of jazz.
Yeah.
And then write the laundry list of the projects you want to take on to like build the business. Just have lists of those things and then start to say, okay, well, this would be really helpful information to have about my clients, about like where they came from and how long are they on my newsletter? Like some law firms, it's straight up referrals. Some actually have some kind of like authority building content.
Yeah.
And they're come through search. So if they came through search, which article did they come from, if you can
Yeah.
find that?
Yeah.
So these are the types of things you want to just write down. The repeatable tasks in your business, put them in a spreadsheet and say, what do I do every month? What do I do every week? What do I do every day? What do I do whenever I have time? Because those probably should be on a monthly, weekly, quarterly cadence of some sort. It's
Right.
like, a lot of, we do our spring and fall maintenance at Christmas, right? Like that's
Right.
the
Right, exactly. Oh, that list has been sitting there for a while. I just want to get
clean
that
that
done.
up.
Yeah, quick.
So we first start with writing it down. We don't have to go as formal even to like a quote unquote standard operating procedure, but you want to write down, what are the things we generally do repeatedly on a basis? What are the projects I want to be building? And simply write it down.
Yeah.
Then the second part is really starting to think about checklists and templates, in the sense of like, well, this is kind of similar language we use all the time.
Yep.
Hey, you can go in a Google Doc for right now. It doesn't have to go into like Clio or some like official. I mean, I'm a ClickUp lover, but
Yeah.
um, you got to like be careful about how many docs you put in before you know
Right.
where you're going to put stuff.
Right.
Before you organize all of your standard operating procedures, just put them in one folder in Google. Just put them there, and then like as you start to bucket them, when you have like enough there's enough pattern to say, yes, we need a folder for our client SOPs, and we need one for our business development SOPs. And even like SOPs, we think we have to like film the step-by-step video. It could be just notes of like stuff that you like. The checklist manifesto is probably
Yes.
the book I should have like talked about, but
Oh, I love that. But actually, someone already talked about that, but it is such a good one. And what I love about that is he starts with checklists for like surgeons, and
yes.
it's not, there's no question why this is important, because it's like saving lives literally. And so then it's like, okay, well, if a surgeon needs a checklist, why should I not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you can start thinking about automations and workflows and specific things like that. But the first step is like, one, do I need to be doing everything I'm doing in my business? Are the things
Yes.
I can just stop?
Yep.
And then two, what is it that I'm keeping? And generally, when does that happen? The steps are, what am I, for these things that are repeatable, what are the general steps I am doing? Or like, at least what's my mental checklist? How do I get my mental checklist from a mental checklist to an actual checklist?
Yeah.
And then start to say, okay, where's the juice worth the squeeze? Like, where's the bang for the buck on
Yeah.
systematizing things? Because I will tell you, the minute you start with like a project management tool like a ClickUp,
Hmm.
um, it works best when you have a process that you're adjusting the tool to, versus on the back end, um, adjusting your process to fit the tool.
Yes. I've
Um,
done that so many times
yeah,
too. You go in and you're like, somebody's already created a template for this. Let me just go in. And then I start with this template and I'm halfway through thinking, this doesn't work at all. Like
yeah,
this is or I don't come to that realization and it's painful because I, kind of go through that. And I also in my list in my head, I'm always thinking about what do I hate doing and what has sat on my to-do list way too long. And it shouldn't stay there. It should be stuff that where you're just like bang, 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 knock it out. And if it stays there for more than like in my definition, like a day, I find somebody else to get it done. Because clearly it's
yeah.
something that's like there's some hurdle where I either don't want to do it or I feel like I don't have the tools or there's some issue and I need to get to the bottom of that issue, whether it's handed off to someone else or whatever the answer is. But like get rid of the things that you hate doing.
With one exception,
Okay.
too early. What happens too early on is that, again, if I know you do law firm marketing, but like, if you're going to outsource your social media,
Yeah.
actually, like a generic, I know that you don't say this, but like a generic carousel post being like, it's national something or other day, does not cut it
No.
anymore.
No.
Like, so instead of like putting together a content calendar, if for things that you outsource, you have to know how to do it or
Yeah.
get help putting the foundations together. You have to know your finances. You can't just be like, oh, I don't want to look at my finances, I'm just going to give it to my
Yes.
bookkeeper.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like find the person who's going to do it and but not like be, have horse blinders about it.
Right.
Be smart and know what's going on in a way that it gets done. But even like if you're talking about finances, like get the taxes done. Like you don't just sit on the taxes because you're overwhelmed by them. Get them done in the right way. But obviously you need to be a part of that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about putting these systems in place and then so that they can bring you to that third level, which is scaling. And I find this so true because you can't even really think about that growth and taking on more business and traffic and more of everything if you don't have space in your schedule, if you're too busy like doing all the tiny little things that don't necessarily require your attention. So how do you get, first of all, how do you think about it and how do you sort of plan for it? Because I know that some people just it's not even on their radar to figure out how to get to that level.
Yeah. So this is why, going back to that, like, serving fewer types of clients, fewer types of things, means there's less little ad hoc things that come up, because you can start to systematize more of them. So there's just less business models to take care of.
Yeah.
Scaling, and like, most people, tend to be like accidental scalers, as they hire some people because they're too busy and they don't want to turn away work, and then they realize that, oh wait, I don't have the systems. I don't have the systems, even the tech and the tools, but they don't have the philosophy around hiring and managing people.
Yeah.
So this is like a 12-month journey, which, again, all the time frames I'm giving, it's going to take me 3 to 4 years and really know what I'm doing in this business,
Yeah.
and a year to like hire someone. I say that there's the pre-scale, which is where you're saying, again, what are those tasks that I want to get off my plate, either back end admin task or winning the work type of business tasks, or the actual, some of the lawyering tasks that
Yeah.
this is the, if I'm going to bring a paralegal on,
Right.
well, I can't just be like, here's your desk, just watch me and let me like toss things over the fence to you, especially that now that, especially if you work remote, like,
Yeah.
you have to be codifying what you're doing and saying, okay, this is, a job description, but not just like a job description, but like who's going to do it, when they're going to do it, how long does it take, and where did you document it, and where will they look for instructions? All
Yeah.
those things should be started to at least somewhat put together before they show up.
Yeah.
You're going to also spend the next 6 months, the first 6 months before you bring people on, amassing cash, because you're going to probably have to pay people before you start making the money to pay for their salaries. And so um, you have to like prepare for, okay, I'm going to need to both pay their salaries and bring on more people
Yeah.
from a business perspective. And that might take some time. So I need to
Sure.
be stacking cash
Be ahead
in
of that.
advance, be ahead of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to have to spend the first 3 months training them and onboarding them and slowing down,
Yep.
which may mean, again, dipping into that cash buffer a little bit. In 90 days after they start, they'll probably start to be adding value. Again, knowing whether or not they come in, all people we add to our businesses should, in theory, be revenue generators, but sometimes like they are not billable in the sense that like, so, they are considered a cost center in like
Right.
very corporate-y sense.
Yeah.
So does your business support having that on there? And if it turns out that you can't break away from the client delivery work, the 6 months before you scale might be the time to say, do I need to restructure
Yeah.
my packages so I'm not billing hourly, so that the time I'm
Oh,
spending with my team members, I'm not in my back of my mind being like, how can I make this go as fast as possible so I can get back to billing?
yes. Okay, that is the perfect transition. The mention of the hourly billing, I'm like, okay, I was gonna work the conversation over to that next because I felt like that's exactly where we were going. So let's like put a title under this next section and talk about hourly billing for a moment. And it's a little bit of a kind of left. I'm not gonna say turn. It's just sort of a left jog from what we're talking about. But let's talk about the problem of hourly billing. And this is, we briefly talked about this before we started recording. This is sort of this religion for a lot of lawyers that this is the way the world is run and how you make money and whatever. And let's talk about why that's just not the way to think about things, and it's not effective, and it's really not the best method of revenue generation.
I think it all boils down to, particularly when you get good at something,
Yeah.
right? Why should you make less money for being better at it? I mean, that's
Yes.
like the real answer, right? Like,
Yes.
so you get more valuable. You have internal processes that mean you spend less time doing something. And usually those, instead of like, oh, I'm going to bill you for the hours that I'm going to like, if I can prepare it because I have templates or I have checklists or something like that, and I can do it faster, that actually should like save
Cost
the client
more.
cost more.
Yeah. It should, because it's better than like I'm slow and I'm figuring this out. And it's like, wait a minute, why are you spending more on something that takes longer and I'm not really good and efficient at? Like it's so backwards.
It's so backwards. So, like, then you get in the trap of like, okay, I can't spend time bringing in the business because, again,
Yeah.
then I'm not making the money. And I can't spend time training and documenting and developing the systems because I'm having to be on the billing hamster wheel. I think this is
Yeah.
why you look at like big firms, right? Like I just binge watched again the Partner Track series on Netflix. I don't know if that's come up
Yeah.
in
No.
this conversation.
What is that? Is that a show?
It's a show. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. No, I don't know that one. I thought you were going to say Suits.
Did watch that too. No,
Okay.
partner track. It's a different Netflix show, which is it's a interesting watch. You should
Oh,
you know
okay. Okay. That's the first. I will definitely check that out because that sounds good.
yeah. But they're billing. They're hitting billing targets, and um, it's like, well, did they win more cases? Did they close the mergers? Like
No.
but also the people at the firms who are doing the billing, they have admins, they have
Yeah.
staff, they have IT departments, and those
Yeah.
people are not billing hourly. They
Right.
are on salary. So you have this like mix of big firms, you have the back end. When you're a small firm, you are the back end.
Yeah.
And if you're always saying, well, if I'm not working, I'm not making money, well then when am I ever going to find the time to do the business building work that keeps me
Yes.
growing the business?
Yes. Yeah, I just think it's so clear and obvious to me, because even back in the day, because I work with lawyers, they oftentimes that's the language they understand. And so they would say, I need you to help with XYZ. And they have an assumption also of how long that should take me. And it's like, wait. What? And so then, it's like, okay, well, why is this expensive? It should only take you 5 minutes. And I can't tell you, especially in the beginning, how many times I would get an email like this. That should have taken 5 minutes. And so as you go through this whole growth process, those are the kinds of things that you realize are giant red flags. And those are not the clients that you want to work with, long term, because they're not seeing the value and all of that good stuff. But the answer to growth is just not, you've got this limited amount of time and you're becoming more efficient. And so your time is becoming less valuable as you become more efficient. And it's like, that's the opposite of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to grow, like we're trying to make more money. So let's just, say at the end of this section that, like, please reconsider this whole idea of hourly billing. That's just not going to work in everything we're discussing here. It's just not a growth plan.
And it also keeps you, again, like I come from a lot of the marketing world as well. Like it keeps you functioning as a commodity order taker.
Yes.
Instead of a true strategic partner, because a strategic partner is going to spend. I come from I don't know if we talked about my background, but I come from the world of McKinsey and company consulting. That's my background.
Yeah.
And they don't charge based on the number of associates and admins they have, and they make sure that their profit margins are appropriate for that.
Yeah.
But they charge based on the value that they're providing for their clients.
Yeah.
And they look for high value opportunities, and they price based on value, not price based on or impact. They don't price based on how many, I don't know, and look at the hourly billing rates that they would, imply for their directors, because it's insane. But that's not how they work. But that's because they have expertise and authority and clout. And you might be like, well, I can't be a McKinsey company. Well, if you're a super specialist in this particular, like if you're a super specialist in customs trade law about things coming from China for the next 2 to 3 years, you can probably make a lot of bank.
Right. And the value that you're providing, to come back to that idea of the value-based pricing, the value you're providing is in, easily in the tens of millions of dollars. And so to look at the value that company is getting from your work as opposed to just your hourly rate, it's just so clear that we're going to base your revenue on the value you're providing as opposed to just some arbitrary hourly rate. Okay, so with that in mind, you talk about revenue milestones. So let's kind of transition over to that. What are they? How does it work? And how do people kind of think about that?
So let's assume, what's the general hourly billing rate for most of your audience, if they were to have to say what they charge?
Yeah, well, I would say on the low end, it's a few $100s an hour, maybe somewhere $200 to $400 an hour, up to, like, if you're in Manhattan, it's probably $1,000 to $2,000 an hour.
Yep. So that's what I thought. Just wanted to make sure that I was speaking to the right audience.
Yeah.
So you're as a soloist, as like a single firm, you probably hit your first break point of like, okay, I'm running out of time. I can't bill anymore, even if I wanted to, because I'm on the edge of burnout, somewhere in the $250,000 to $500,000 zone. Like that's typically what I see as like the first revenue benchmark, which at that point, you're probably going to need to bring on office staff, maybe an admin, maybe a marketing team, depending on how you're doing marketing, and like your first paralegal. Then as you start to like cross, you could probably use that to get, $750,000 to $1 million, depending on like your scope of practice. Then you're like, all right, let's start talking, going from soloist to practice. And at this point, you're at thinking, okay, well, how am I going to share the book of business? And am I going to be the partner that kind of manages all of it? Or am I going to truly bring on a co-partner, or kind of like someone else in the business? What's their biz dev responsibilities?
Yeah.
How are you sharing profits? Those are some of those questions. And then, that kind of $1 million to $2 million threshold starts to become like, okay, like let's start talking like practice, like, okay, shared assistants, more kind of back office staff. That's where I see those kind of revenue thresholds, and each one of them, to go from I don't want to say like a Lincoln lawyer type, like soloist, like working out of a single shop with
back
like
of
a
his car.
back of a car. to someone like hiring that first hire at that, like, the first back end hire at the, 250 to 500K mark.
Yep.
Then thinking about, okay, if I'm going to have more junior lawyers and more partners,
Yeah.
then you go from like being a lawyer to running a firm.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a whole different level of time management. You're going to still be doing less delivery
Yeah.
because you have to spend your time managing the firm.
Right. Well, and then like that goes hand in hand with what we were talking about these systems, because there's a point when you have to get it out of your head. You have to go from um, being this entrepreneur and having it all in your head and organizing it, and you have to have a certain amount of willingness to let go of some of that stuff too. And I will say this, I feel like, is where some of these challenges in the conversation happen, because it's a leap, and you have to kind of say, okay, I realize that I'm going to let these team members handle this stuff because there's only so many hours in the day. So how do you kind of align the systems building with those different the revenue milestones that we were talking about?
Yeah. So in the usually in the first phase, you're starting to document how your business runs,
Yeah.
how you get clients, how you bill and invoice for the work. And again, that it's evolved over time. You're going to want to set up some light systems, but again, as you're probably starting out hourly billing, and then
Yeah.
as you get ready for scale, you might switch to a different kind of model,
Flat
which
fee.
flat
Yeah.
fee, subscription, anything that's like doesn't not time for dollars, and so that changes the systems there on that how you run your business, and
Yeah.
then the systems grow into the how do you deliver the work, how do you practice the law in the sense of
Yeah.
like, what are the cases, and what are the resource library and things like that, how do we do the law part,
Yeah.
and then also the next things to develop are like, okay, how do we bring in business, particularly when it's, especially if you expand to like more of a practice versus an individual person.
Yeah.
um, what's everyone like, is everyone equally good at business development? Is it an eat what you kill model? Is there
Yeah.
is there a sales person, an internal person responsible? How do you share your office manager and
Mhm.
your finance department when you start to scale? So those are the types of things that, like, first focus on how your business runs, and then focus
Yeah.
on how the law gets delivered, and then focused on how does I grow both of those for a firm.
What I keep coming back to that I think is so clear in this conversation is where I was describing kind of how I started and then took this big pivot and changed everything. And I earlier said it wasn't that that was wrong. And it's not that any of these things are wrong. And so when you were a solo attorney and you started out doing it a certain way and kind of just writing down these sort of rough ideas in terms of outlines of your processes and systems, and then you change, and that was like you were just saying, that was probably hourly. That wasn't wrong at the time. That was okay for building the thing that you were building, but recognizing that that's not your long-term plan, and when you step into those other phases, those are pretty significant changes, and you're going to rethink a lot in terms of all the parts of your firm and your systems and possibly your billing structure and all of that. And you don't have to take on, in that massive change, you don't have to take on the weight of feeling like you screwed it all up in the beginning. This was the plan, and now we're in different phases. And I don't know, there's just something kind of comforting about thinking about, like, there's these different seasons of building your business.
Yep, I have a framework on my website. It's called the Rooted Business Life Cycle. It's the seed stage, it's the sprout stage, it's the strengthen stage, it's the scale
Yes.
stage. It's also the sunset stage, because it turns out that, like, maybe you get tired of like a particular practice area,
Yes.
or the market conditions. If you were doing lots of like tech-based M&A for,
Yeah.
maybe that's
You're done.
you're done. Maybe like
You're gonna retire.
or like someone was doing like an accountant I was listening to a podcast on, they were doing tax planning for people exiting startups. Well, that kind of during when the interest rates changed, it's like, well, that's
That's the
not
end of
a
that.
that's the end of that.
Yeah.
But I think it's more important of this. It's important to say, not only was that not wrong, actually formalizing these things too early, I would say, is wrong because,
Yeah.
like I see this with niching and putting
Yeah.
together packages. If you don't have enough reps to know what they really want and what they really need,
Yeah.
actually productizing too early is
It's a
could be a
mess.
really detriment because you could not you could productize too low or put
Yeah.
too much in the product for the wrong person because you're not really listening to your customers. So like
Yeah.
hourly billing is actually a great way to start to
Yeah.
get practice and to mitigate your downside and their downside.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Even for myself, I couldn't have got to that second phase without knowing the pain points that I went through in the first phase and know like those were the red flags and to know that we're not going to do it this way. And I know that because I went through that. And, I'm not just guessing. And, with these like internet based businesses, like the world changes so rapidly and you just have to roll with it. And it's really not that much different for law firms. You just have to recognize that there is this constant change, and then to go back to this idea of like keeping your systems in flux and knowing that things change there too. And, we're going to reach after we just spent 6 months doing this, we're going to realize that it would really save us a lot of time if we reorganized it in, the following way. And it's like, oh, look at that. I wouldn't have realized that until I spent 6 months with it and
Yeah.
kind of, figured these things out. What other kinds of mistakes do you see people make in terms of setting up these systems and thinking about these growth plans?
So, like, if we zoom out to like the broader perspective on systems, like how our business operates, one is people set up a system to a tool when they actually don't know how the business operates. So that's like they set up they use the wrong tool for the purpose. They don't know how their
Yeah.
business operates. And then two, um, when like the in the systems I talk about, in the like more of the philosophical systems, I call them the authority system, the revenue model, the client conversion system, business operations, people, and then metrics. So most of the time we have a system for like client work, we have a system for marketing and maybe a CRM and like document repository and case management system. But what we don't have is a system for managing ourselves and managing our business.
Yeah.
So what are the outcome metrics you're tracking, including your financials? What are the activity metrics in the I call them the seeds you're planting? What are those?
Yeah.
And what are all the projects that you're working on at a time? Um, Again, if you have limited time because you're um, you know, switching from hourly billing perhaps, or,
Yeah.
you're onboarding a team member, what are the most important projects at a given time? How can you be protecting at least 10% of your time for business building efforts
Yeah.
and really understanding and tracking how your business runs so that
Yeah.
you know what measures matter
Yes.
and having
Yeah.
a system for the measure, either tracking those and measuring those.
Yeah. I feel like we could have a whole show on all the metrics that don't matter. People that are looking at the wrong thing. And it's like, I have 10,000 Instagram followers. It's like, so that's great. Or not great. I mean, does that matter? I think probably not so much. Okay, so it's time for the book review. We have a whole section on the website that has a library of all the past books that all the guests have recommended. So, Jessica, what's the book that you want to recommend that lawyers put on their bookshelf today?
4,000 Weeks Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Berkman.
Awesome. Okay, so why? What's great about this book?
So this book, like most productivity advice, is how do I do more? How
Yeah,
do I get more done? And Oliver Berkman's advice is you can't get it all done. So what's most important is to decide what you want to get done and start to like make peace with that.
yeah,
Um, because like very with our niching conversation, you really can't serve everybody.
yeah.
But
Nor should you want
nor
to.
should you want to.
Yeah. Because
um,
truly, once again, coming back to that whole experiment of the first bunch of years of my agency, I learned there was a lot of people that just were never going to really be the right fit to work with me, and they just were too money focused. And part of that was my fault because I had these ads that were money driven, and but then they come in and they don't have the value. They didn't really want to hear what I had to say and whatever. And if you're a lawyer, that's really problematic. If you get a client that just wants to, do their divorce for $99, but they don't want to hear any of your advice, that could really be a huge problem. So there's going to be clients you don't want to have, and that's okay. And it's actually the right answer.
Yep. So it's about really like making peace with the fact that you cannot do it all and you shouldn't do it all. And how do you move forward from recognizing that you only have 4,000 weeks?
Oh. It's a little bit morbid, but it does make sense, because then it's like, let's put a number around it and like, let's plan it out.
Has anyone mentioned the book Die with Zero by Bill
No,
Perkins?
no, that sounds good too.
Very in the similar vein. I don't know if I'm allowed to have two, but Die with
Sure.
Zero is you're always kind of balancing time, health, money, and different stages of your life. You'll have more of individual those kinds of assets. So
that's so true.
Yeah.
Where there was a great book that I promise this is related, called Salt, Sugar, Fat. And it was basically about the food industry and how no matter what, there's always one focus at any given moment: salt, sugar, or fat. And so then all the food products, like this super processed stuff that, you see, is about, being opposed to whatever the negative thing is. So it's either back in the 80s when it was all fat-free stuff, or salt-free, or sugar-free stuff. And this is a similar idea, but for life. Like there's always one of those where that's your emphasis at that moment in the part of your life. And then the others, like they're there, but the other one is taking priority.
Well, in this case, it's again, like in your 40s, you have the most health you'll have, maybe not as much money, but you have your time. So how do you want to invest your time and money given the stages? Because like what you can do at 40, you can't do at 70.
Right. Yeah. But so it's health, money, and time.
Yeah, and I think there's like a kids element to it, right?
Yeah.
Like you the magic window, which is why hourly billing is nuts.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Anytime I start in that conversation, I'm like, oh gosh, where do we even begin? Like, are we still talking about this? Like, let's move on. Hourly billing, no, thumbs down. Let's move on. Like, let's just all agree it's a bad idea, but it's still there. It's still comes up. So with that in mind, I have this new section of the podcast where I like to ask for an action item. So after someone has finished listening to the entire episode, make sure you get all the way to the end, because you never know what I might say at the very end. But you've listened to the whole episode. The first thing that you should think about doing in relation to everything that Jessica and I have been talking about is what?
I'm going to give you two because I like to do bonus.
Okay,
one is
that's great.
Map your stage of business. Are you starting, growing, or scaling? And then start making a list somewhere of the regular routine tasks that you do and start to say, do I need to do it?
Yeah.
Does it need to be done by me? And for all the things that need to be done, either by me or somebody else, how can I start getting for the first one or two things, can I get like the mental checklist out onto paper?
Yes. Oh, that's so good. So getting the stuff out of your head onto paper and organized. And what was the first one?
First one is just know the stage of business you're at and
Yes.
recognize that, like, if you're in the starting stage, some of the scaling stuff we talked about really doesn't matter. You're not there for it yet.
Yeah. And don't like jump ahead too, because like we were saying earlier, that could also be problematic if you're putting a program into place that isn't really supported by your firm yet. I think that's super important. Just kind of like know where you're at. Let's be realistic. You're in the starting phase, and we'll eventually get there. Or maybe you're not. Maybe you're in that middle phase, and we need to rethink your hourly billing. That's where we're at right now. Oh, that's awesome. Jessica Lackey is a strategy and operations advisor. Thank you so much. I feel like this feels like a healthy conversation where we're like eating a nice bowl of something healthy and like clearing out all of the things that are on people's to-do list and trying to get it working better for their firms. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening to this episode of the CounselCast podcast. Be sure to visit our website at counsel-cast.com for the resources mentioned on the episode and to give us your feedback. If you enjoyed this episode, I would appreciate if you could rate and review the podcast on Apple and subscribe to your favorite podcast platform. See you on the next one.